Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dotson, and I am your host for Highland Park Poetry and today's program, Poetry Today. My guest is a returning guest. His name is Curt Vevang. Curt is a Chicago native, a product of the Chicago Public Schools and the University of Illinois. In 2016, he published his first full-length poetry book, A Scant Bagatelle. Earlier this year, in 2017, he published his latest collection of poetry called The Nature of Things. He has also published two rhyming children's books, The Prince and the Elf, and its sequel, The Prince and the Elf 2. Both children's books were illustrated by actual 6th grade art students. All of his books are available at Amazon. Just you type in that keyword, Vevang. Curt's poetry has been published in anthologies, poetry magazines, and many poetry websites, including Highland Park Poetry. On our Muses Gallery. He's also well known to Highland Park Poetry audiences as a competitor in our Poetry Pentathlon, and most recently as the guest host of our April reading at Madame Zuzu's. And along the way, Curt's poems have won honors from the Illinois State Poetry Society, as well as Poets and Patrons of Chicago. Please welcome Curt Vevang. Hello, Curt. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate that. I guess I didn't break the camera the first time, right?
No,
so
you didn't.
I get to come back. That's good.
Well, so it's only been a year, so I guess talk to me about the process for your new book.
You say the process or profits?
I know there are no profits.
Okay, very, very good, because that would be a very short speech if I had to tell you about the profits.
No.
The process was pretty much like the first book. I went through CreateSpace on Amazon.com and did it all myself, and which is really a nice facility.
Yeah.
And I would have, it'd be nice to have a lot of publishers, knocking on my door saying, "Oh, I'd like to publish your book."
Yeah.
But that just doesn't happen in my case. And
Right.
When you hear even these people that write bestsellers have to knock on 100 doors before they get anywhere, I thought I'll just do it myself.
Well, that's very wise. And actually, I used CreateSpace this year to create Highland Park Poetry's Poetry Challenge chat book.
Okay.
And it has a few, you have to be technically comfortable with that type of thing, and I guess you have no problems with that, right?
Probably not. We'll see in the book. Maybe, there may be problems we don't know about.
Well, and that's the challenge with self-publishing, is that you're so close to the material, your own poems, and you've read them 100 times, so it's hard to distance yourself enough to really do serious editing, and formatting. Did you find that a challenge, or did you get some help?
Well, I beat my wife over the head and said, "Please read my book." And then with the word altar, meaning a church altar, I spelled it right one place and wrong another. So,
see how good that it was that Susan was willing to...
She picked up one of them, but not two of them.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow. Well, but it's good to have a team of people working with you on a project like that. Yeah.
And Amazon, CreateSpace is happy to provide that. And
I
was just too cheap to, I don't know what they get for it, but they're happy to provide any of that information.
Right. Yeah. So now, what was your release date for the new book?
It was in January, I believe.
Okay. All right.
So I wanted to just get it rolling once I decided.
Now, the title, The Nature of Things, I mean, is this is there a specific theme or thread that connects all the writing in this book?
Well, at least all of the writing in the first chapter.
Okay.
And there's only 4 chapters in the book, or 4 sections, I should say.
Okay.
And the first section, I think, is all tied together by the nature of things. But the nature of things was a poem that I had in my prior book.
Okay.
And I liked that, and I thought that would, the nature of things sort of allows somebody to think about what's going on, consider the whys and wherefores of life, and et cetera.
Now, is that poem, The Nature of Things, reprised in this collection?
As a matter of fact, it is.
Well, wait, maybe you want to share that with us if you brought it. Did you bring it?
I didn't bring it. I couldn't
Oh, okay.
find
No,
it
no,
in my
no,
book.
that's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I believe I read that last time.
Okay,
so,
then we won't repeat ourselves.
Right.
Okay.
But the thing, so what I did was something like the nature of things, like anybody probably writing a book, you come out with a title. So I checked on the internet to make sure that nobody else ever used the nature of things. And I ended up with about 5 million hits.
Oh.
I mean, it was originally a poem written by Lucretius back in BC.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So maybe he gets the first. He gets the first dibs.
So that was a very famous poem, and a lot of people have come out with books since then about what he wrote and analyzing it and everything.
Okay.
And then there were a lot of TV shows and other radio programs, all with the name of the nature of things. So maybe I heard that term somewhere at one time and didn't know it. I thought it was original, but obviously I was not the first guy. But then again, in this day and age, as you can well appreciate, how are you ever the first one to do anything, right? Everybody has done something somewhere along those lines.
We are always standing on the shoulders of someone that came before us.
Right.
So, well, would you like to share a poem from the new collection?
Okay.
I keep putting you on the spot. Read
No,
faster.
okay, fine. I would like to do that. As I mentioned, this book is in 4 sections, and the 4 sections. The first one has what I would term serious poetry. The second one is something that I wrote. The third one is humorous, and the fourth one being just stories about growing up in Chicago.
Oh, neat.
So I sort of tried to tie that all together. So in the first section, there's a poem that I seem to like a lot. I think I like it more than other people, which is something that's very not unique to poets. And this one I'd like to preface. It's entitled The Lovely Lady of the Louvre. The problem is a lot of people read this and they say, who is this? And so I'm going to explain right up front. I'm talking about the Mona Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
and then
I was right. I was right.
right. Well, I thought everybody would be right, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't pick that up. The Lovely Lady of the Louvre. All alone, she hangs quietly on her large wall. With never so much as a blink, she intently watches hundreds of milling tourists, taking selfies with her subjugated to the background. Facebook pages in every land wait excitedly to be adorned with her smile. As this gracious lady stares at the crowd, she shrugs. Did they come to see me or to take my picture? Am I simply an attraction to be digitized? Yet she is too worldly not to know that these art lovers have a tour bus to catch in 20 minutes. She knows well, in a world where she competes with Lego stores and love locks, that she could have been bypassed completely. Posing patiently on her lonely wall, suddenly her smile broadens. Her thoughts float back to happier days, days when she and Leonardo spent those glorious afternoons together in his studio.
Oh, Wow, you are taking some historical, I mean, did they have an affair?
I doubt it, but who knows?
Who knows,
right? I mean,
right?
that's what I think that's what she's always been smiling about.
Okay, all right.
So, and she probably thinks nobody knows, but I figured it out. I was at a poetry reading here recently at Brood Awakening. It was about 2 months ago, I believe, and Bill Maher was there.
Oh, yeah,
the guest
our previous guest, yes.
from last month. And he read a poem about Mona Lisa.
Oh, neat.
And then it was my turn. And I said, what's the probability we're going to have 2 poems about Mona Lisa at one time? So
That's
then
great.
I read mine. And subsequent to that, he asked me for a copy of my Mona Lisa.
Oh,
And he
neat.
took it and translated it to Chinese and sent my copy and his Chinese version of his Mona Lisa for publication in China.
Oh, wonderful.
So it'd be very interesting. I mean, not that I could read anything, but
right, I know, yeah.
it's just interesting after seeing him last month and talking about publications
Yeah.
and all of his translations, that there was this tie-in.
Yeah.
I found it interesting.
What synchronicity that you were both thinking about the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
Although this is interesting for me to hear you read this one because this poem doesn't rhyme. And there was a time when if you said Curt Vevang, I would say rhyming poem.
Right. Well, when I read my next poem, which comes out of the section on my book, which is the humor section,
Okay.
It'll sort of put all that into perspective.
Okay. All right.
Perhaps with that introduction.
Then let's just go right in.
Okay. I think that's almost a natural. This is called Beating the System. I like to write poems where all the lines rhyme, but the MFAs say rhymes are passé. I feel so guilty when I hear them whine, so just to fit in, I do it their way. I now sadly write without any rhymes. Free verse, I am told, is what is required. I should have been born in earlier times when rhyming was in and highly desired. While my proper poems are not without praise, when I use a rhyme, they say it's taboo. Free verse is indeed all the rage these days. What in the world is a rhymester to do? I have it by George. This should please the crowd. I will write sonnets where rhymes are allowed.
That's perfect.
Does that explain my whole frustration with rhyming? So sometimes I rhyme and sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
But the nice part about a sonnet is they can't fault you for
That's
rhyming.
right. Although, you know what, I have seen contemporary writers claim that they're writing a sonnet, but, I look at it and I say, okay, the only thing that this bears any resemblance to a sonnet is that it has 14 lines, because the structure, other elements of the structure have been thrown out the window.
Right.
So
one man's sonnet is another man's rant.
Okay. That's delightful, though. But I do respect your ability to make clever rhymes, and you do humorous poetry very well.
Well, I thank you. But even speaking of humorous poetry, I sometimes wonder, are people really interested in humorous poetry? I mean, any more than would you read a humorous poetry book? I mean, very few people sit down and read a joke book. I mean,
right.
that are older than 12.
Right.
It's you want something with more meat on it. You want something.
And and I think that's the challenge. I certainly face that personally, in that I tend to try to go towards the humor, or to always incorporate humor in my writing, even if I'm rhyming or not rhyming. It doesn't matter. And maybe that's insecurity in my part, that I don't think I can compete on a poetic level with the poets that have come before, or even, you know, the giants in our in the writing industry now who you know, write more serious stuff. So, but I tend to go towards poetry that has humor in it, and I think it is harder to promote and harder to sell. Because there's always that you know, you can't really sell it as humorous poetry, because then there's the expectation, well, this is going to make me laugh.
Right, and that's the kiss of death.
And so then, of course, it's the kiss of death, right?
Right. Well, and, you know, I think you do a lot of stand-up presentation type poetry to a group. And when you're presenting poetry to a group, humor is great. Everybody loves to sit there and laugh.
Right.
And that's when I'm doing an open mic or something, humor is what it's all about.
Yeah.
But I think if somebody sits down to read a poetry book,
Yeah.
Maybe even if there's something humorous, they're not going to get it because they're not expecting it.
Right.
They may think you really meant something.
True. Yeah, that is true.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Although I was trying to think, there is a British writer whom I greatly admire, named Wendy Cope, and a lot of her stuff is deliberately funny. So you should check her out.
okay.
And she rhymes too sometimes.
Well, and there again, I don't ever like, if I'm going to do something serious, normally I won't want to have any rhymes.
Yeah.
Because it takes away from the depth and the seriousness of a poem, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that there are so many competitions now where I want to say Poetry Out Loud is a national poetry competition where high school students learn to recite published famous poems, and many of the old famous poems have rhyme in them. So it's even though they're very serious.
Well, and I think by the definition of poetry, the definition of poetry 40, 50, 100 years ago, you had to have rhyme, right? I mean, at that point. Nowadays, as my sonnet says, nobody wants to hear rhyme when they're reading it or whatever.
Okay.
I think that's
All right.
the impression I get, at least.
Okay. You look like you're itching to read another poem.
Well, I didn't mean to look so anxious here. I was holding it. I could set it down and not look like I'm in such a hurry. But this is another poem so the first poem came from the serious part of my book, and the poem you just heard came from the funny part, if you will, or the humorous part. There are only 3 humorous poems in the book. But then the fourth section is sort of a growing up in Chicago type section that I wrote a few years ago, and I never published it because I didn't think there was enough there to stand on its own. So I included it in this book in its own section. So it has a lot of poetry, vignettes, stories, etc. From my early childhood, which I remember my early childhood very, very well. I had 3 older brothers that were 12, 14, and 16 years older than me. So it was almost like having, in addition to my father and my uncle that lived with us, and sometimes my grandfather, then I had 3 older brothers, so it was quite a crew.
You were the child amongst a sea of adults.
Right.
Okay.
So anyway, this is one of the poems, a prose poem that I wrote that comes from growing up in Chicago. It's called The Cookie Factory. Kids whose dads are bankers get to go to the bank on Saturdays and count money. Kids whose dads are Major League Baseball players get to run the bases after the game. But I was the luckiest kid of all. My dad was a painter. I don't mean an artist. He was a real painter. My dad could paint anything. I think the best thing he ever painted was the Maurice Linnell Cookie Factory. One Saturday when he went to move his ladders, I got to go with him. I couldn't believe it. There were barrels of cookies everywhere. I didn't know there were that many cookies in the whole world. While my dad was busy moving ladders, I decided to have a cookie. Then another, some more, and a whole lot more. Before I knew it, it was time to go. So I stuffed my pockets with as many cookies as I could. This might be my only chance. How did I know if I'd ever get to come back? Going home in the car, I tried to sit carefully so I wouldn't crush my cookies. But you know cookies. My pockets were filled with crumbs. And then I got carsick. Let's say it together. I lost my cookies. So I had an occasion just last week to read some poetry at my old high school in the city.
Goodness. Okay. Which high school? What's the name of your high school?
It was Amundsen High School.
Oh, okay.
It's on the north side, Damon and Foster.
Okay.
Anyway, you know, you stop to think, well, first of all, a poet comes to read poetry to an assembly full of junior and senior high schoolers nowadays. What do you say? You're lucky if they even show up and they're not cutting class or whatever.
Or they're not buried in their phones.
Right. So I had to come up with some stories, and this was certainly one of them that I tried, and I think they liked it quite a bit.
Well, and then you have that little sort of interactive thing at the end that can did they say it with you?
I think some did.
Right? Okay.
And it was an award ceremony, so
they weren't.
There were some parents there, and I think the parents said it more than
I
the kids
see.
did. But it was a lot of fun to do, and the fact that I had been a student there 60 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, you know, they're tired of looking at old people. Certainly, when you're in high school, nobody wants to look at an old guy. But I did have some connection there.
That's so very cool.
That worked.
And so did you reach out to the school, or did the school reach out to you?
It was sort of a combination
of
the, there was an assembly going on. And, so I got to do that. I did that also the prior year.
Wow, that's fabulous.
And enjoyed that. So I'm going to set these poems down so you don't think I'm itching to read another one.
No.
I have more to read.
Okay, well,
which is good to know.
I don't know. The time is continuing on. So if you wanna read another poem, I would love to have another poem. Unless you wanted to talk more about this book and how it's, or did you want to talk about your first one, A Scant Bagatelle? Since you produced it yourself, you'll certainly be able to compare how sales are, and are you doing something different in terms of promotion for this book?
Not really. And you know, I would do something different in terms of promotion if I had any concept what to do different. I could stand on a street corner, you know, and take my shirt off and wave books in the air and maybe get somebody's attention. But it's a hard slog. The most fun in writing and publishing a book is writing and publishing the book.
Right.
And then if anybody happens to go accidentally buy a book, then, and the kids at Amundsen High School had the opportunity to pick up a book, so that was good. Since you mentioned another poem that I might read here from the more serious part of this book, and the back to Lucretius, who was the original person with this concept of the nature of things, he tried to apply science way back 2,000 years ago, apply science and philosophy to man's problems. And there's a lot of work is obviously happens subsequent to that time, and I like to think of scientific solutions and rational solutions, philosophical solutions to these. So here's a poem. It's entitled "Halfway Up the Mountain." And prior to starting this, I just, well, the actual wording here is, I feel for those with less. I feel for those with more. And that's, we all have compassion for people that we see that don't have much. But I have an equal amount of compassion for those people that have a lot. They have almost as many problems as people that don't have anything.
That's a unique perspective, yes. Okay.
Halfway up the mountain. From my perch halfway up the mountain, I can see the very peak. I can look down and see the foothills at the base. The bottom can't be seen by those at the top. Many there have no concept that the bottom even exists. Some arrive at the top after a long, arduous climb. Others are born there. Days at the top are spent amassing more and more, worried they will lose what they have, struggling to maintain their footing on the slippery slopes. Those at the base search for a foothold, a pathway up the mountain. Many languish in repeated failure, unable to climb very far before being stymied, forced to try a different trail. Some try hard. Others don't try at all. Some are successful. A few haven't the tools to even begin. From my perch, halfway up the mountain, I watch climbers trekking by. Those seeking wealth nod and stay their course. Those seeking happiness rest here a while, and for some reason, never seem to leave.
Very, very philosophical.
Well,
Yes.
thank you. Speaking of that, you know, with this book, the nature of things, when you publish a book and I'm sure you went through this also at CreateSpace, when you're publishing a book, you have to specify the category that the book is in.
Right.
And so I got to the situation where I had to decide, well, what kind of book is this? And I thought, well, there's a category there for humorous. Maybe I should use humorous. And then there's another category that's philosophical, or philosophy. And I thought, well, I'd like to think it's philosophical. And then, obviously, there's a category for poetry.
Right.
And, you know, you sort of feel compelled to choose poetry. But there is a category there that's called non-classifiable. Okay? So I like to think of this book as being a little bit poetic, a little bit humorous, a little bit philosophical, and very non-classifiable.
That's fabulous.
That's my
That's great.
That's summary of that.
Well, I think we're just about out of time, and that we're, so I thank you, Curt, for joining us once again on Poetry Today. It's always delightful to see you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope I didn't come back too soon, and I'll stay away for a while now. I don't have any plans to do another book for quite a while. I've got 4 poems so far for my next book.
Okay.
And,
all right, well, you know, give it a couple of years. We'll see you.
Right, very, very good.